So I always want my characters to be valuable. And by doing that, sometimes I have to push boundaries or try new things. And every time you do that, there's always a risk that something's overtuned or something's a little bit too crazy. And that's just the way I've always designed. And that's the way I always will design. I try not to make them overpowered, but they do end up that way when you try to make them really valuable.
So, follow-up question to that someone else asked. Have you ever designed a character, got really excited, and the Kabam was like, sorry, we got to nerf them. They're way too powerful?
I'm going to say every character. So
Wow.
Pretty much every character I've designed, and I'll give you two examples, which obviously are Ebony Flaw and Mr. Mangog Eggnog. Those two characters are the ones that got nerfed the most, but I would say almost every single character I built has been nerfed. I always like to start very wide. I'll build an insanely powerful character that I know for a fact is going to have value, and then I'll trim it back to the essentials. Nick Fury, he's a crazy good character. He started as almost double the size he was now, like in terms of his kit abilities and what he could accomplish. So that actually got trimmed back in half. Same thing with almost all my characters. There was a time where Dr. Doom was even more broken than he is now. And almost every single one of my characters through the iteration and playtesting process got nerfed. Now, for Ebony Maw, I think he's a good example of how difficult it can be to find a good balance. His abilities were so strong and so potent in reviews and playtesting that I was forced to nerf that character. He was not allowed to ship in the way he was. He had too much unavoidable degen on defense. His damage was way too high, and it all comes from a direct source, so nothing could counter it. And his power control was the best in the game. So we had to nerf that character, and by doing that, it kind of led to a worse character. Now, the other problem is Ebony Maw had such a strong ability where he would steal your abilities and give them to himself, and then reduce your abilities by the amount he stole. He used to have that ability in his kit, and it was so strong that he would zero everyone out on the opponent's side. So we had to nerf his kit at 5 p.m. on a Friday, the day before he locked. So I was just sitting there working late, like, what can I do with Ebony Maw? It was all panic mode. And a bunch of his kit kind of came together, and he had a cool loop there, but we didn't have the opportunity to fully test it and fully make sure it was really awesome, like I like to do for my other characters. So because he started so powerful, we actually ended up nerfing him into the ground because we didn't have the time to iterate on him and give him the love that he deserved. And I think that comes from designing a character that's overly complicated and does too many things. Ebony Maw was my second character, and I learned a lot from that guy. However, I did make the same exact mistake again a couple years later on Mangog. And I think it's just a note for any designer that we have to make sure our complexity doesn't go too overboard or the character suffers. Then also players won't understand them either.
So, to sum this up, this is so amazing and ironic. If you're joining us, because I'm going to put this as a premiere straight, and we're already at 26 minutes, and he's going to give us an hour of his time because he's amazing. But when I posted the video in honor of you that I sent you, and I'm honored you watched it, the two comments that people kept saying was, I mean, this guy's amazing, but he did design Ebony, Coleslaw, and Mangog. And here we are, breaking news, saying before Kabam touched him, he actually designed what would have been two of the biggest damage outputs in the game. And you basically described before before Ebony Coleslaw had been nerfed, that Ebony Coleslaw would have been the greatest champion in the game.
Yep. He was nerfed as a direct result of the live ops team, who's kind of in charge of the monetization and making sure the game flows and the balance is in place. They complained that he was going to be too strong, so we had to nerf him. But also, I don't want to make that seem like a bad thing against that team. It was very important that we nerfed him because it was actually unhealthy for the game. And this doesn't just affect Ebony Maw. This affects most characters you guys will see in the game that are underwhelming. They started at a very high level, a lot of them, and we had to bring them down because there were too many concerns. And the way we like to look at it is we can always buff a character, but just with the ecosystem of MCOC how it is right now, it's really tough to nerf a character because people paid for that. They spent their hard-earned money into that toy. They invested in many months. Maybe they grinded arena for many hours, many days. It's not fair for us to just go and take away that toy. So if a character does end up underwhelming, we can always bring them up later, especially with our buff balance process now. But we can't really nerf them a whole lot. So we want to be careful with that.
Wow. You just confirmed what I've said on my channel for months, which is that a lot of the times champions will be somewhere in the middle, it feels like, when they're released. And I feel like that's because it is easier to buff someone later than it is to nerf them. And it does feel like, especially when you're spending, some people spend tens of thousands of dollars chasing a champion, right? If you
For sure.
if you buy a Ferrari and then you turn it into a used Taurus, suddenly, especially with the refund system, you feel like you've been essentially stolen from.
Oh, absolutely. No, I totally get the mindset. It's a very tough monetization model that we have to be very careful